Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth, with hosts Doug King and Cody Deese.
Thank you, and welcome again to the Presence Podcast. I am Doug King, glad to be here today with my good friend and partner, Cody Deese. Cody, you doing all right today?
I'm doing well.
Yes.
Happy whatever day you're listening to this. Present people. It's good to be back. It's good to be back in the groove, Doug.
It is, and it's great to hear from folks and get the feedback we're getting. Quite frankly, not every email that we have gotten feedback on has been a positive email, and we respect that. We know that to some people, Cody, this has been very upsetting, and even had one person who sent me an email and said they would not listen to these podcasts anymore because we were questioning the very idea that Jesus was anything other than fully God. So that's a great segue into where we're going here today, man.
Yep. As we said last week, it is the wall.
Yeah.
That seems to divide lots of folks right now in 2020. But what's interesting about it is this wall has been around for the last 2,000 plus years. We have a history in religion of how we situate Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
What role does this Jesus play in the biblical narrative? And then we have a history, a record of the church literally being divided on opinions of who Jesus is and what role Jesus plays. So this isn't like us stepping into some new we're stepping into a river that's been flowing for a long, long time. It just so happens that as we look at spiral dynamics in second tier, we're actually starting to see some serious connections, which you saw a long time ago, your dad saw a long time ago, which is, we got a situation here because if we read the biblical narrative through the lens of an integral perspective, then we've got some decisions to make about what to do with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a great time for the discussion. And not only, again, is it because there are a variety of things that have happened that we'll get into here through the history of the religionizing, if you will, of Jesus, the religion of Christology as Christianity, and the denominating thereof. But it also comes into play with the way other world religions look at the religion of Christianity and the near impossibility it is for any other religious perspective to have a conversation with Christianity because of the wall the Trinity presents to them. And we will get into that at some point down the road.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, as we've talked about before, one of the feedbacks that we get is from folks who in some ways they're on their own path of evolution and they've kind of evolved into an interfaith type mindset. And that is a beautiful step in evolution. It's necessary. It's beautiful. Inevitably, what happens, though, is they reach out to us because they run into a wall.
Yes.
And as much as they want to hang on to interfaith, there's a tension there, almost a contradiction between affirming other people's religions and faith and simultaneously claiming Jesus is the only God and the only way. At some point, if you believe that, you bump up against the wall and you have to inevitably say, my religion is superior than yours because my religion is the one that actually contains the divine.
Yes, that's right. So beautifully put. So today, though, what we're going to do is we're going to get started with a little history and context of this whole conversation so we can build on it as we go along. And coincidentally, I think it's really cool, Cody, that you happen to be taking a couple grad courses right now, both of which at this particular time have entered into a study of the Trinity. So I've asked Cody if he would to please just put an overview together. We don't intend to be a theological seminary here where you get a degree if you pass our Trinity course. So we're not going to try to get into that kind of depth. But I think it is very appropriate to give the historical context of the way these things came. And there may be some of you that are not aware of the nuts and bolts around the beginning of this conversation that led us to where we are today. So Cody, why don't you just take off with that and kind of give us a little bit of history of the Trinity and how we got here.
Class is in session.
I'll put my gum up. I'll put my chewing gum under my desk.
Please do. Pay attention, Doug. Let me just start here because for those that are unfamiliar with church history at all, I think it's safe to say this conversation on like a Trinitarian thought is very, very complex. So what I'm about to give you is just a high level, so you understand a little bit of the terminology. But if you want to, like if you're just nerding out on it and you want to get into it, you can take a deep dive into this stuff and it can go for days because there's so much parsing of words and so much nuance and even confusion about how some people interpreted a particular word versus another group that interpreted a particular word. So let me start here. Most historians and like church history gurus would say early Trinitarian thought. So this idea of what do we do with, because it became a problem really early on of, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So you have Judaism, and then you moved into Christianity where it was like, wait a minute, what do we do with all this Father, Son, Holy Spirit language? What do we do with the book of John, which we'll get into next week, some of these texts, with John and some of the, what looks like to be appeared references to Jesus claiming to be God. Those all began really early, but like you don't really get into early Trinitarian thought until even after the Council of Nicaea. But to give you a quick rundown, early Trinitarian thought kind of started with Justin Martyr, who, for those that don't know, was an apologist. Roughly, we're talking somewhere around 100 to 165 AD. So when you go back, you start to see Justin Martyr wrestling with some of these ideas. Okay, what do we do with one God? Yet what do we do with these Father, this Word? Word was a big deal. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And so you start to see Justin Martyr in some of his writings wrestle with this, but he is what they call a binatarian or binatarianism, okay? So that's basically like, he's like, essentially, let me whittle this down. He's like, I don't know about the Holy Spirit. I'm not there yet.
Right.
But I can tell you there's a Father and Son in the narrative.
Yeah.
And this Son seems to be the Word. Okay, so it kind of starts out with those seeds. Then you move to Irenaeus around 130 to 202. And Irenaeus, coincidentally enough, studied under Justin Martyr. So he wrote, I've been reading all these primary sources, so forgive me for nerding out, but he wrote against heresies, which I think is interesting. By the way, Doug, for the record, if he was writing today against heresies, I believe you'd be mentioned.
Oh, I would be insulted if I were not. I'd be sending Irenaeus an email immediately, like, where am I?
So Irenaeus gets into kind of the second stream of this early Trinitarian thought, which is the only begotten Son. And what began to happen was Irenaeus saw, like he would read like Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. And out of this kind of created what is called two-stage logos theory. You can look it up if you want to, but the premise behind Irenaeus is he begins to wrestle with, wait a minute, if Jesus is the only begotten Son, when was Jesus begotten? Was there a time when Jesus was born, or has Jesus always been? And so if we claim that Jesus is God, then was God born? At what point was God born? And there's lots of complicated debates about that. Some people say, oh no, when it says in the beginning was the Word, that's when God said, let there be light. So when God spoke, that's when apparently the Word or Christ was actually begotten. So you start to see real quickly how strange this gets of them trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this? Well, then you move to the monarchian debate. I won't go into it, but if you want to look at it, it's 190 to 230 BCE. And you had monarchianism, but then you had modalism, okay? Which the modalists believe the Father, Son, and the Spirit are different modes of activity in history, okay? The monarchisms believed, or they emphasized, God as one. So you kind of hear that monotheism. And then modalism was, okay, we don't believe they're persons, Father, Son, Spirit. We believe there's some type of modes. And the monarchianism said, no. God is one. We emphasize monotheism. So you start to see already this massive tension between God being one, a monotheistic religion, and then, wait, if we subscribe that these are three gods, then are we no longer monotheist? And what do we do with all this throughout the narrative? Okay. Then you move to Origen. Origen really planted himself on what is called eternal generation, which is the idea of Jesus being the only begotten has always existed. So Origen kind of produced the idea that there was never a time when Jesus has not been. So when you read the narrative and you're like, Jesus was born of a virgin in the first century, Origen would be like, no, Jesus has always been before, because he's God. Therefore, he's always existed.
Right.
But he didn't know a lot of what to do. So he tried to work out, like, so what do we do when it says only begotten son? What do we do with this? So he's wrestling with that. Okay. Then you get to the point that I want to make. And this is, again, I'm just trying to help you. This is from early Trinitarian thought. So now we're kind of in the middle space here, which is what is most notorious, and most people know about this in history, but it's the Arian controversy. The Arian controversy is what led to where I want to go and read a statement from, which is the Council of Nicaea. Okay, so that's like the big one. So to give you a little bit of dates here, Arius, so Arian controversy was named after a particular individual, Arius, around 256 to 336. And let me just give you in a nutshell here. Arian basically had this concept of Christ that is based on the belief that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten within time by God the Father. Therefore, Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father. Okay? Do you see how nuanced this gets?
Sure.
And so, obviously, this controversy erupted between basically two interpretations of Jesus' divinity. You had this big debate. Literally, Doug, it became between two words. These are Greek words: hypostasis and ousia. Ousia means essence. Hypostasis essentially translates to persons. So the big debate was, is Jesus, does he carry the essence of God? Is Jesus, or is God in three persons? And how do both those work together? So you could essentially say that what led up to the Council of Nicaea was this idea of a Trinitarian view or a non-Trinitarian view, even though they didn't have the language for it quite at this time. And so what happened was, after Arius kind of made this declaration that Christ actually was born, that he didn't exist for all time, you now move into a time in history around 325, actually, is when the Council of Nicaea happened. But there's more going on, and this is the point that I want to drive home too. There's more going on here, and that is about the time Arius releases his view of Jesus, which wasn't necessarily, I don't believe Jesus is God. He didn't say that. And actually, when you really get down to it, you can kind of see where Arius, he kind of does believe Jesus is God. He just simply disagreed that it was full essence. He did not believe that. Now, that said, Christianity at the time, and this is really important, I think people forget this, at the time in which the Council of Nicaea met, you have to know the historical context here. This is also the time where Constantine was the emperor. This is the first time in church history. I mean, people forget this. If you read like a church history book, what you find is in one generation, two generations, they moved from being persecuted. And if you want to know about the persecution, man, go read some of the primary sources. This stuff was real. I mean, Eusebius, if we can trust him, writes a lot about this, but bodies being torn, flesh being torn, all for just bearing a label of I follow Christ. Then you move a couple generations forward, and then you have an immediate flip. And now for the first time, Christianity and the empire have merged together. Now, that's really interesting to me, that the doctrine of the Trinity, demanding that you have to believe Jesus is God, happens simultaneously when Christianity and the empire get in bed with each other. Now, I'm just going to throw that out there because I don't know about you, Doug, but for me, that says something pretty massive. Actually.
It does. It does. I agree with you, and it fills in the blanks when you're looking again at spiral dynamics. Remember that the blue meme era, the traditional era of that Roman Empire, politically began with loyalty to the Caesar, and the Caesar had the ultimate authority that you did not question. Spiral dynamics, the traditional age, you do not question. So what we need is a Jesus that is an ultimate authority that you do not question. And then you could merge the two, and you could not just have a Roman Empire, you could have a Holy Roman Empire. And
That's right.
No citizen could question the authority of either of those.
And so this is what happened. So essentially, Arius makes his statement, Arian controversy transpires, and then basically Constantine, the emperor, who shouldn't even have his nose in the business of any religion,
Right.
Now that's our perspective. Obviously, the world was different back then, but decides, hey, we need to do something about this. And so 318 bishops come together, 325 in Nicaea,
Mm-hmm.
and they meet simply to resolve this Arian controversy. As a result of that meeting, they write what is become a creed, and the express purpose of the creed was simply, now hear this, to denounce Arius and his theology. That was the sole purpose of the creed. So like churches today that recite this creed, you just need to know it was only written to denounce someone they disagreed with who still actually believed Jesus was God. We have evidence of this.
Well,
So you don't stand a chance.
Right. Well, hey, look, the churches divide over what the temperature ought to be in the auditorium or the color of the carpet. Right. So, I mean, to get upset about what someone's doctrinal position, that's how we got denominated. But anyway, so what about this Nicene Creed? Have you tell us more about that.
There's been different versions of the Nicene Creed, but these 318 bishops get together and they decide, you know what, we've got to set the tone here. If you do not line up with this statement, then you're out. I mean, that's essentially what Christianity did in 325, and that's not an oversimplification. They just booted people out. Either you line up and you nod your head and you agree to the statement, or you're out. And so I thought it'd be good, because this will tell you a lot, but I'll just read the first version. Now, there are different versions of the Nicene Creed because they met again a couple different times. And Constantinople, they met again in 381 and changed it all together. So you can look into that if you're interested. But here's the original one. We believe in one God. Okay? There's monotheism. Father, all sovereign, maker of all things, seen and unseen. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten from the Father as only begotten. That is, from the essence of the Father God. From God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made. And here's the Greek word, homoousios, with the Father, or equal in essence with the Father, through whom all things came into existence, things in heaven and things on earth, who because of us men, our salvation came down and was incarnated, made man, suffered, and rose again on the third day. And I'll stop there because I get into the Holy Spirit as well, but you get the point. The point is that they make a declaration here. You line up with the reality that Jesus is God. This is the final decision of the religion in 325 called Christianity. Now, I will tell you it doesn't end there, but I won't go into it. But you need to know lots of people didn't line up with that. And so it created the Arian controversy did not stop at Nicaea. There were so many aftermaths. And coincidentally enough, that argument broke into like 4 different segments. You had people that believed the Son is the same substance of the Father. The Son is similar to substance with the Father. The Son is like the Father. The Son is unlike the Father. And most historians say the Trinitarian debate really reached its climax around 381. But you had different people involved with trying to help shape it. And then ultimately you have Augustine who came along in the 4th century, and he's got this big sermon on the Trinity and wrote a lot on the Trinity. And most church historians would say he's kind of the one who put the nail in the coffin to help clarify it and make sense of it. But the point is, you get to a question, which is, I think, is what we brought up last week, and it's something that I want to bring up this week because I think it's why we're even having this conversation right now. There's a lady named Amy Jill Levine that teaches at Vanderbilt, and she's not writing about the Trinity, so I don't want to take her words out of context, but I think the questions that she poses is the question that we're asking. And I actually think she does a really beautiful job of helping us decide what do we do with Jesus, right? So she says this. I thought this is really interesting. Now, she's arguing more so about supersessionism, but here's the point that she says. As long as Christians could believe that Jesus was fully divine, there was no need to distinguish him explicitly from Jews. He was already distinct. No one else had a virgin mother or was raised from the dead. Once the church met the Enlightenment in the secular academia, however, Jesus no longer looked quite so original or quite so distinct. He appeared comparable to other figures of antiquity. If Jesus is simply a really good rabbi, that is, someone whose advice I can follow and still be in more or less good standing in my Orthodox synagogue, someone whose ethical message and storytelling ability can also be found in Jewish texts, then he is at best a fine teacher. But this portrait should be insufficient for those who want to call themselves Christian. If Jesus is not the Messiah, the way, the truth, and the life, or the Son of God, quote, then there is no warrant to follow him as opposed to following Gandhi or Buddha or Hillel or any other great teacher. Once the supernatural and the transcendent are stripped away from Jesus, then there is no reason to recite the creeds, celebrate Christmas or Easter, or speak of washing away of sin at baptism or resurrection of the dead. Now, hang on, and I'm about done here. She says this, Christian skeptics thus have an enormous problem. Why remain Christian if Jesus is one of several wise individuals with good ideas for social improvement? The easiest answer to the question is to argue that Jesus does what no one else ever did or could do. He is distinct, he's special, he's better. This process means depicting a Jesus who stands out as unique in his Jewish context. It is also unusually means enhancing the distinction, and this is done by painting Jewish context in noxious colors. What she's saying, Doug, essentially is this. If we do not subscribe to Jesus as God, then who is Jesus? And if Jesus is anything other than God, then why follow this Jesus and not Buddha?
Yeah. In other words, if Jesus is not God in every way pre-existent, equal with, and in every way God in essence as well, then we go to the other extreme, and that is Jesus has no meaning. And there's no in between because, again, for 2,000 years, that is the way that boundary-driven thinking works. You're either on one side of this wall or you're on the other side of the wall. And what's lacking here are several things that I know you want to get into because you mentioned identity and role and function. But yeah, this is where it starts.
That's right. If you notice, Doug, everything I just read, it was all about Jesus' identity.
Yes, it was.
Very little about the role and function Jesus plays in the narrative.
Unless he's not God, and then his only role and function is he's just a good guy teacher, and he's just like any good guy teacher that you could go meet in a yoga class. It's either or, and that's the either or conundrum that they set up. That's not at all what we see in the narrative. For example, Father Abraham is called by God to go out into a place not knowing where he's going. He sought this heavenly city. That's a unique calling for Father Abraham. And who called Father Abraham? The divine called Abraham. And how about Moses when he had the Sinai experience? Is there any other person in the world that had that? No. Moses had a unique experience that no one else had of the divine. a unique divine experience in receiving the law. The same is true of David. When David was brought to kingship by God, God as source, God bringing him through proof of his encounter with Goliath, and on we go. The prophets, and the word of the Lord came to me saying. Those are uniquely divine experiences that are revealing, that have a role and function in the realm of form, which we've talked about ad nauseum. So first of all, let's just make sure we understand that you don't have to be either fully God or have no God function, because that is not true from the beginning of the story. These people I all mentioned, they all had divine experiences, and they had specific, unique, only to them functions in the narrative.
I think what this brings up is, as we start to kind of pave, I can see we're kind of paving a particular path here.
Yeah.
How unique was Jesus? This is the question, right?
Sure.
Sure. And is it as unique as we are unique, as all of us are unique, as humans are unique? But would we say Jesus is as unique as Moses, but they're both essentially just two folks in the narrative that have a role and function?
Well, and obviously from my end, and where we're going to go with this, is that, yeah, they each had a unique role and function. Moses's role and function was in the realm of form, and Jesus's role and function was in the realm of transform. And in perhaps, I think, the next session that we do here, number 3, I've written some things I'd like to read that have to do with God's transformative action in Jesus of Nazareth, and why Jesus was selected by God to be the servant of God's message. It wasn't Jesus's message. That's why Jesus kept saying, "The words that I speak are not my own." So what we're tracing here is the fact that Jesus played a unique role and function on the one hand, but that unique role and function wasn't so he could prove he was God, and we come up with creed and dogma for that. To me, the whole biblical narrative is God's revelatory work about who I am, what my nature is, and what my relationship is with God. And that is what the role and function is from Abraham to Moses to David to the prophets to Jesus and the apostolic writers. So in that sense, Cody, what we'll get into next is not just the divinity of Jesus, but what if Jesus was coming to show me my divinity? What if the God story makes a lot more sense if I find out about my divinity because of the work that Jesus was called to do? And there's a whole lot more to it that we can't get into. I know our time's kind of running out. So yeah, we've got all that ahead of us to discuss yet.
I love it, because that's a game changer. That comes at, because it's not stripping the divine.
No.
It's actually expanding the divine.
And that's what happens in an integral approach to the narrative. You don't destroy community by saying the church's role and function is complete. You expand community to wherever 2 or more are gathered anywhere on the planet, any day of the week and any time, and on we could go. An integral approach actually brings you into the concept of everything all in all. And how can God be all in all, and yet we're not in some way or another divine ourselves? If God is, are we not part of the all that God's all in all? So that's where we want to take this discussion, and then primarily keep extrapolating, Cody, the question of, so what does this mean to my life, where I am right now in 2020, trying to navigate all the stuff that's going on in the world? Can I extrapolate this heady conversation into something that's a real world meaning?
I like it. Well, there it is, friends. A history lesson on the Arian controversy.
And I love your approach, man. That's one of the best I've heard, and I've heard a lot of them.
That actually wasn't an approach. Any professor that heard that one, woo, man. Woo.
Today. But there's coming a day when people are going to listen to this and go, wow, it was at the beginning of the second millennium CE that people begin to see what a shift could happen in their God understanding. And it happened with podcasts like this. So that's what we think.
Onward we go. All right, friends, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.